Hi, this is Megan Day on the line. Just wanted to check audio. I still can't hear anyone.
Hi, Megan. Can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. We're not
Awesome.
starting quite yet, but thank you for testing audio. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much.
Okay, I'm going to call the June 2025 meeting of the Manitou Springs Planning Commission to order. And following our commission meeting, we're going to have a joint work session with the Housing Authority Board. So at that point, we'll have them come up and we'll reconfigure the seating. And so I'll start by calling roll. Commissioner Graybill?
Oops, I am here.
Commissioner Latimer?
Present.
Commissioner Storm?
Present.
Commissioner Rosenthal?
Present.
Commissioner Casey?
Present.
Commissioner Day?
Present.
Thank you. If you could turn on your camera, it would be great, Megan, but if not, fine, but it makes it easier to see. Hey, thanks. Okay, so with that, let's see. Next item of business is approval of the minutes. First item would be March 2025 meeting. So
Motion to approve March 2025 meeting minutes.
Second.
okay, all those in favor of that? Okay, I think there's one abstention. Commissioner Casey wasn't there. And then next would be the April 2025 meeting.
Motion to approve April 2025 meeting.
But were you there for that one? Oh, okay. Okay,
Motion to approve April 2025 minutes.
Second.
okay. All those in favor? Okay, and one abstention, Commissioner Storm. And then finally, May 2025 minutes.
Commissioner, I have, or excuse me, Chair, I have a question, a clarification,
Okay.
really. Page 6, third paragraph. Chelsea, are you with me? Is that word after ADUs, should it be required or allowed? I think it's about the second sentence.
I'm sure would be allowed.
It says required. That's why.
Okay. Yeah, if, do you have notes or something that you noted on that you could leave with me after?
Say again.
Do you have notes for your changes?
Mhm.
Could you leave those with me after the meeting?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, with that correction, do we have a motion for June?
I move approval of the May minutes with one clarification on page 6, third paragraph.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor? Okay. I think we should do it every meeting. Everybody whines if they can't see the minutes. Other people whine. Okay, and Commissioner Storm abstained from that. Okay, so now we'll move on to a business part of our meeting. Oh, wait, first we have public comment on non-agenda items. So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to comment on something that's not under discussion tonight, now would be the time to do so. You can have 3 minutes to speak whatever you want regarding commission business. Seeing no takers, we'll move on to our business part of our meeting, and I'll just describe the process we use. We'll call up an item for consideration. The planning staff will describe what the request was and what their analysis and findings are, if they have any recommendations. Following that, we'll let the applicant speak to the item, and following that, we'll open the hearing to the public. Anybody in the public can comment on that item. As we go through it, we'll be guided by what's in our land use and development code, and we'll make our decision based on that. We don't operate on opinion. We operate on what the code says, and we make our decisions based on that. So with that, are there any conflicts or ex parte contacts that need to be disclosed? Seeing none, then we'll move on. First item of business is major temporary use permit for e-bike sales rental service at 302 Manitou Avenue. And we'll start with the staff, and then the applicant can speak. Okay.
Great, thank you. Chelsea Royston for the record. Presenting major temporary use permit 2502 for temporary customer parking excuse me, there's a typo in that. To allow e-bikes, tours and rentals from the accessory structure at 302 to 306 Manitou Avenue. This is a continuation of previously approved temporary use permits for the same business. The owner is requesting to continue that use for another year. Nothing has changed substantially about this application. For reference, this is at the lot that is currently developed with the Subway and Jack's Liquor, and this business operates out of the shed in the parking lot. The applicant has been working with staff. They submitted an application for a major development plan, and all other required applications in summer and fall of 2024. That application was withdrawn from consideration earlier this spring and is no longer being reviewed by staff. So with that said, to make these operations permanent, staff would still require that a major development plan be submitted, reviewed, and approved in order to make this business permanent at this location. With that said, staff recommends approval of the application with the condition that the temporary use permit will expire 1 year from the date of approval. And this is my the recommended motion language. This concludes my presentation.
Is there any questions?
Can you refresh my memory? Is this the third time we've approved this as a temporary?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, would the applicant can state your name and address for the record?
Gregory Cobble, 1207 Manitou Avenue.
Okay, you have the floor now. You'd like to,
Okay. Yeah, our desire is to develop that property and build a 1,900 square foot building, which we've been working on for the better part of the last 2 years. Spent a lot of money already on that development. The owner has, not me. I'm going to lease the property. The latest bid came in at 1.2 million, which would make it about 700 square feet to build that rectangular, square, plain, generic building. So that's a little too high yet for the owner. He still has a desire to see that through. He's temporarily pulled back just so we can try to figure out how best to go back at it. The development, the extra cost, the city, CDOT and so forth, those extra costs are what's holding us back right now. So we're trying to figure out a way to reach some sort of solution to lower that price down. The owner is good with about 850 to 900,000 to build that, but the 1.2, little higher than 1.2 is too high for him to develop that and then recoup his money from my lease basically. So we still have a desire to do that. Currently we're in the middle of season renting bikes and we're just using that building to do e-bike tours out of. If the building doesn't work, we still would like to utilize that lot if we can. And I know it would require development, even if it just sits as a little building. It wouldn't be nearly as much to redevelop it just for that building. I don't believe as it would be for the entire project, but one of the catches is that we're going to try to, and I reached out to the mayor, talked to him a little bit, and I've talked to Chelsea about it, but currently the lot that we're on exceeds 35% of the total lot, which the total lot includes the 3 businesses, Subway, Jack's Liquor, and our new proposed building. If we didn't fall over that 35% threshold, the cost would be much smaller because what that requires is for us to develop the entire lot from the Subway all the way down, landscaping, sidewalk, charging stations, I think even a new lane to pull into, I'm not certain. But those costs exceed $250,000 or so. Those are extras that are kind of making it hard to develop. So, but for the moment, we're just asking to use that lot throughout the rest of the season. That'll get us into the fall and winter where we can continue working on developing something out of that property. Does that make sense?
yeah, thanks. Any questions? Okay,
One,
Maria.
will you be using temporary structures for expanding your business to include selling e-bikes and bike accessories and servicing e-bikes? Will you be putting up more temporary structures?
For now, no.
Yes. Thank you.
The only thing we were going to do was build a 1,900 square foot square building for a store. to do the entire business out of there, which is a wonderful location for us with the, with the garden access that close and whatnot. But right now the costs are just prohibitive.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thanks. You can sit back, and if we need any more from you, we'll bring you back. Okay, the hearing's open to the public now. If anybody would like to comment on this, now would be the time. Okay, now seeing no takers, then I'll close the public comment portion of the hearing, and we're ready for discussion or a motion.
So I understand the pain that this is causing, just because it's more than 35%, it's going to be all those added things to driving that cost up. But I do remember last time when I think we approved this, we said we were not going to do it again. But on the other hand, I feel like he's made a good faith effort towards trying to do what needed to be done for the development and to make it right. I would be willing in this situation to approve one last conditional use permit.
Is that a motion?
Just, it's discussion. I'm happy to make a motion.
Why? I mean, why not do it every year until he can get developed?
Because temporary use permits aren't really meant to be used on an annual basis. All right, I'll make a motion to approve the major temporary use permit for e-bike sales rental service at 302 West Manitou Avenue. MT, my glasses on, oh my God. MJT 2502.
Sorry, just to clarify, 302 Manitou Avenue, not West Manitou Avenue.
Sorry,
And I apologize if that's a typo.
302 Manitou Avenue.
Okay, I'll second that.
Excuse me. Did you add a condition there about just one more year?
No, I don't think so. We need to.
We've,
Okay.
yeah, the attorneys have advised in the past that we can't preclude future applications.
Okay.
Or the board cannot preclude future applications.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. It's no more discussion. Let's vote. All those in favor? Okay, and that's unanimous. So that's done. And good luck. I hope we figure it out for you. Okay, we'll move on. Next item is variance 2504 and variance 2505, 11 Via Loma Vista, rear and side setback variance.
Alan, I'd like to recuse myself on this one. I'm involved in a couple of variance applications that are active right now, and I'd rather not have an appearance of conflict.
I don't think we really, I guess we can ask our attorney. It's like,
I can't.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't, unfortunately, I don't think that's a valid reason for recusal.
It's not.
Unless if this application is your application, or if you're affiliated with it, then, but if you have other variance requests, or applications, it's not.
My thoughts were that how that is voted on might lead to my thoughts about how I present. I'm fine participating.
I think you'll be okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Moving on.
For the record, Zachary Davison, planner. This is for variance to 2504 and 2505, side and rear setbacks respectively at 11 Via Loma. The applicant is Quality Decks on behalf of Bruce Finley. Both are in the audience today. The request to remediate issues with an aging deck that has structural issues due to decay. The request for variance 2504 is to reduce the rear setback on 11 Via Loma to approximately 10 feet from the rear property line at the northwest corner and 8 feet from the southwest corner. The low-density residential zone requires a 25-foot rear setback. The request for variance 2505, there is no reduction on this side, but there is an alteration to a nonconformity. It is going from 4 feet to 5 feet, so it is an alteration of a nonconformity. The zone is low-density residential. Here is the site overview. It does sit back pretty far on the property. And this is a site plan of what is being proposed. They are moving to a 5-foot deck. At the top, you can see there the 10-foot, and towards the southwest corner, 8 feet. They will also be expanding the southern portion, but that doesn't require any variance. Here is an overview that shows existing footprint and the current footprint. At the top there in the north, seeking a 1-foot alteration to a nonconformity, and along the western portion, a 1-foot encroachment into the setback. Here is an overview of the existing conditions. The variance approval criteria requires that it satisfy 4 of 6 stipulations outlined in Title 18. Those being 1, that the applicant would suffer unnecessary hardship. 2, that there is no design alternatives or alternative location for structures that would eliminate the need for the requested variance. 3, that it deprives the applicant of rights enjoyed by a majority of the other properties in the same zone district. 4, the need for a variance is not the result of or from actions of previous owners or is an otherwise self-imposed hardship. And 5, there is a disability affecting the owners or tenants. And 6, the variance request is required in order to preserve a contributing structure in a historic subdistrict. And it satisfies 5 of the 6 outlined in that section for variances. And should the City Planning Commission find it appropriate to grant the 2 variances, staff recommends the following conditions: that the approval of any application is contingent upon the approval of all applications. One cannot exist without the other. You cannot extend the rear portion without altering that nonconformity on the side. The motion language options are as follows. The commission can approve the variances at 11 Via Loma. They can approve the variances at 11 Via Loma with conditions, deny the variance at 11 Via Loma, or postpone the variance until June 9th, 2025 for further consideration. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Questions for staff? I'd like to clarify, it seemed like in the write-up, one of the discussions was the fact that there was some shifting of the hillside that made it impossible to reconstruct as the existing deck was. And that was part of the reason for the wanting to move that extra foot.
I'm not entirely certain on I guess the specificity of it, and it may be a question that might be better proposed for quality decks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, then could the applicant come up? Okay, start by stating your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, I'm the applicant, Bruce Finley, 11 Via Loma, Manitou, 80829.
Okay, and
This
Yeah.
is
Matt McCracken, Quality Decks, and McCracken Professionals. We partner.
And your address, just for the record, we need,
Oh, yeah.
oh, you need to get close.
750 East Highway 24, Woodland Park, Colorado.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you have the floor. If you'd like to explain what's going on, that would be helpful.
Right. Thanks for your attention to the matter, Commissioners. 4 years ago, when I bought the house, I remember walking around the back with the seller's inspector and seeing this kind of rickety deck made of wood with the paint chipping. And it was peak market and I couldn't really object. But it's needed the maintenance. And so I'm finally at a point where I think I have an affordable plan from Quality Decks. I shopped around a little bit to basically replace that deck. From the photo, it showed how it sort of wraps around the back of the house, which is on a slope. And to your question, Commissioner, it was that everyone living up there has this problem of gravity. It sort of pulls things down from gardens and from gravel and rocks. And the footer of the house is pretty solid, but that deck isn't quite flush with the footer. And so I wanted to replace it in a way that would be durable. And the material they have is cool. It's fire resistant, so it would boost my safety. I think everyone living in this part of the world is mindful of the risks. And I think I would be a better platform if worse came to worse. And by having it flush with the footer and more solid, it wouldn't be sort of crumbling and rolling down. And the plan that Quality Decks came up with has new holes where the posts would be. And it's a slope, but there's a relatively flat area immediately to the west of the footer. And that flat area is where new holes would go down according in the plan and be more solid. And so that's what and I met with Chelsea and the Pikes Peak Regional Building Council approved the plans. And what we wanted to do was get whatever variance is necessary to be able to do that in a solid and resilient way.
Thanks. Question?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I too live on a very steep hillside and we've replaced footers I mean, it's a pain, but could you explain to me why you can't just do a deeper footer on that hillside where the existing supports are?
Yeah, the existing, there's conditions with the existing soils. I mean, no, we're not going far, but there's conditions with the existing native soils where that existing line of the deck is, where it's deteriorating at a faster rate. It's just not as good as material as even that 1.5 feet away. So that's the problem we're having.
It's also buried under a lot of gravel where the footer is sort of shored up. And so it's a lot of digging to pull out the old rotting pillars that would go down a long way. It's just not, I guess, as affordable or feasible to do it. So by moving them a little bit farther out with a fresh hole on this already sort of erosive, it isn't super steep, but it's a slope and it's that gravelly material where not a lot of stuff grows very easily. And so, I've been trying to like shore up plants around there. Just anything that gives stability counts there.
Okay. Other questions for? Okay, I think unless you have anything else to add, we're done talking to you. If we have any more questions, we'll bring you back.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, if there's any question or any detail, the Quality Decks team is great and will be any information you need.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Now the hearing's open to the public. If anybody in the audience would like to comment on it, now would be the time. Okay, we'll close the hearing then and deliberate. Anybody like to go first?
Seems like a reasonable request, given the geography of where your home is located.
Well, I'll also point out the cards went out, and no neighbors had any feedback or concerns about the foot movement.
I'd like to move to approve the variance at 11 Via Loma based upon the findings that the request meets the review criteria for granting a variance as set forth in City Code Section 18.06.42.
I'll second that.
Okay, any more discussion? Okay, then let's vote. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, then that's done.
Sorry, just your microphone cut out. Could you please state the vote for the
Okay,
record?
the vote was unanimous, 7-0. Yes, she did. Now let's move on then. I guess we're ready to do the work session now. I don't think, unless you have anything you want to do first, Fred? Are you ready?
No, I think we're ready.
Okay.
Would you like to do like a 5-minute recess to?
Yeah, a couple minute recess. So what I propose is we will separate out. So we'll have interspersed HAB members and commission members. So everybody come up and find a seat. Someone is welcome to sit here. Yeah, where's Allison? She disappeared. Oh,
Trying to fit one in between each of us.
yeah. Yeah, we'll probably have to share mics too. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Allison, you get to sit.
Sit next to Alan.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Joking. Hi, Alan.
Hey,
Hey.
so we're not totally interspersed. I guess it doesn't matter. Yeah. That's my citizens academy. Oh. Wait, maybe we need to. Let's. Yeah, I'm just waiting till the smoke settles there. Okay, I'll start calling roll for the commission. Yeah, there's room here if somebody.
Mhm.
Okay, Commissioner Graybill. And sort of raise your hand so that people see, since we don't know each other. Present. Commissioner Latimer,
Present.
Commissioner Storm,
Present.
Commissioner Rosenthal,
Present.
Commissioner Delay,
Present.
Commissioner Casey, Commissioner Day.
Present.
He's there. Okay. And okay, Allison. And I'm Commissioner Delwich.
Good evening, Allison Gerbig, Housing Advisory Board Chair. I am not as formal as you, but I will go around and say Nate, yay, Aaliyah, or Glenn, sorry, Glenn. Do you need them to say their last names? Okay, Aaliyah,
Hi, present.
Amy Mock on the screen,
Hi, present.
Crystal, and Rebecca.
Present.
And we are missing Michael Quintana this evening.
Okay. And I guess you take over then, Fred.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Housing Advisory Board members for joining us. I have a quick PowerPoint that to sum up what the discussion was at the last work session, and to try to move it forward and frame the issues here. So let me try to share my screen. Okay, let's see. How do I make it into? Okay, there we go. So this is our code revisions work session, part 2, regarding housing occupancy limits, accessory dwelling units, minimum parking requirements, and transit-oriented communities. Those are the 4 bills that the state legislature passed last year that are compelling compliance, compelling municipality compliance. Just as a recap, some of this is a repeat from the last work session, but the Planning Commission had identified a few code sections for review. This is one of them, the 2024 state land use and housing legislation. Also, don't want to forget that the Planning Commission wants to also relook at the variances, the criteria review, as well as looking at densities in certain zoning districts. That would potentially also help for additional housing. Tonight, we're just going to talk about number 1, the state land use legislation, and also focus in on the ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So the housing legislation, as a recap, there were four House bills that were passed. The last one, House Bill 1313, transit-oriented communities, is one that does not apply to any area within the city of Manitou Springs. So no action is required. It doesn't mean that the city can't comply with House Bill 1313 if it wants to. One benefit is with House Bill 1313, if we wanted to comply with that, there could be some funding available for more housing. But that's not required. What is required are the first 3, House Bill 1007, 1152, and 1304. So housing occupancy limits, accessory dwelling units, and minimum parking requirements. So I'll go into 1007 first. That prohibits local governments from setting maximum occupancy limits on single dwellings unless the limit is based on either a demonstrated health safety standard or if it's based on some sort of governmental affordable housing program guideline. These occupancy limits, including those based on familiar relationships, were considered or deemed to be void as of July 1st of 2024. So what we can do is make some changes to the code to come into compliance with this particular bill. When they're talking about health safety standards, that could include standards that you could typically find in the building code, the International Residential Code. Or example, limit the number of people based on unit square footage or number of bedrooms. In some places, it doesn't apply here in Manitou, but in some places where septic systems are your sewage treatment source, you can tie housing limits based on the size of your septic system. We don't have to worry about that here. But what we do have are standards that are already in the building code that have a minimum square footage or a minimum area that's required per person. So we have a current definition of household that's currently in Title 18, which I've confirmed with legal counsel. They agreed that this does not meet the requirements of the bill. Because we specifically say any number of persons that are related by blood, marriage, adoption, guardianship, domestic partnership, or other duly authorized custodial relationship as verified by official public records. So this I think would be recommended to be removed in order to come into compliance with this particular state law. It also adds or a group not in excess of 5 persons living together as a single housekeeping unit. I would say if the Planning Commission wishes to keep that section, or if you go down the road of wanting to keep something like that, I would want to verify and work closely with legal counsel to make sure that it complies with the intent of the law. With that said, the Colorado Department of Local Affairs did offer some guidance as to how municipalities can come into compliance with this law, and they point to, as I had referenced before, they point to the building code, the International Residential Code, and currently the International Residential Code, which we follow, which is administrated by the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department, requires a certain amount of space per occupant, 150 square feet of space for the first occupant, and then at least 100 square feet of space for each additional occupant. That's currently in the building code right now. And so that's one way to be into compliance, is to get rid of that definition of household and then follow what's in the building code currently. Another thing that I wanted to make note, or that I wanted to add, is our Housing and Habitability Code in Title 15 also contains occupancy limits. And it's a little bit more lenient. It requires less square footage. It requires 100 square foot per person for the first person, and then it moves on and says 175 square feet for 2 people if 2 people are living in a unit, 250 square feet for 3 people, and then so on and so forth, that I have in this particular slide. That actually allows for more people than what the building code requires. So it can be contradictory, but let me briefly talk about the intent of the two things. With the building code, the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department would be enforcing those occupancy limitations for new construction when somebody is applying for a building permit. The Housing and Habitability Code, Title 15, is something that has been adopted in order for the city to assure that existing residential units have offer a minimum amount of square footage for residential units right now. Okay. Oop, let me back. So that, we can move on with discussion on that. When it's time, I've got a couple other, what I'll do is I'll move on to the next House bill. We've got 3 of them, and then maybe have discussion after the whole presentation. Okay, so let me go on to 1304, which is minimum parking requirements. So I skipped ADUs. That's going to be the last. Minimum parking requirements. This prohibits local governments within a metropolitan organization and partially within a transit service area from enforcing minimum parking area requirements for multifamily residential developments, residential adaptive reuse projects, and mixed use projects with at least 50% of the area for residential use. And so it does permit local governments to impose minimum parking requirements of no more than 1 space per unit for residential developments of 20 or more units, or if the development contains regulated affordable housing, upon showing that not enforcing the requirement would have a substantial negative impact that cannot be mitigated by other strategies. So there's a litmus test that we would have to go through. So a portion of Manitou is located within a transit service area, which is proximate to the location of the 2 established bus routes that are along Manitou Avenue. So this map that I have shows that area that applies, that House Bill 1304 applies. And it's basically it's a buffer area, not a buffer area, but it's an area a certain distance away from the 2 bus routes that currently go through the city. So what that means is House Bill 1304 would apply to this particular area of the city. One way, or perhaps maybe the simplest way to comply with this would be to include this language in chapter 18.308, which is our mobility requirements, and just indicate that there's a special allowance for this particular area that's in the shaded area in that map, and that no off-street parking shall be required for new multifamily development or for adaptive reuse development, which is at least 50% of the gross floor area of the development within these particular areas. And what we would do is we would point toward the map that is maintained by the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, which is this map that is on the screen. DOLA is going to be maintaining these maps indefinitely for us. So if anybody has a question over whether we fall into one of these requirements or not, we can go to the DOLA website and they will show us. What this does do is it does, like I said before, it does allow us to require 1 parking space per unit if the development project contains 20 or more dwelling units, or if it contains what's called regulated affordable housing as defined in the statute. Okay. And then House Bill 1152, accessory dwelling units. This is the one that provides a land use regulation that allows ADUs for all municipalities of 1,000 in population or more, and that is within a metropolitan organization, and we meet that criteria. It requires ADUs as a use by right that is accessory to any single unit detached dwelling unit in any zoning district that allows single unit detached dwelling units. It also indicates that HOA rules more restrictive than these rules are now void. That's something obviously as a city, we do not enforce HOA rules. That's up to the HOA. But that's something to note that was also in the bill. And there's some things the city may not do in regards to requiring parking or requiring that the ADU or the primary dwelling on the same lot be owner occupied. We're not allowed to we're not allowed to add that stipulation. We're not allowed to apply what they call restrictive design or dimension standards that would not otherwise be required for the primary dwelling. So one way to comply with this bill, it's not the only way, but one way would be simply to insert into chapter 18.04.3, which is our residential uses section, indicate that an ADU is a use that is accessory to a single household dwelling. You can have one ADU. There's nothing in the bill that restricts us to allow more than one ADU, but the bill requires that we allow at least one per single household dwelling. We can allow the development standards to apply to ADUs that also apply to the single family residences. We can require one on-site parking space for the ADU as long as it as long as the let me back up here, as long as three things exist, and I'm looking at number 1 in the slide. We can require off-street parking spaces if three things exist. Number 1, if no existing off-street parking exists. Number 2, if it's in a zoning district that requires one or more spaces for a primary dwelling. And number 3 is located on a street where on-street parking is prohibited. So those three things must exist in order for us to allow, or in order for us to require on-site parking for ADUs. We can require that ADUs comply with Title 17, which is our historic preservation regulations. If the city wants, we can prohibit the short-term rental of ADUs. We can regulate the size of ADUs to an extent. We can limit them to no larger than the size of the primary residence or 750 square feet, whichever is less. We can require, and I would recommend this, we can require compliance with all applicable fire codes and building codes. And so if we allow this and let the other codes, building codes, historic preservation ordinance apply to that particular use, that appears to be the simplest way to come into compliance with this particular bill. Oh, and that's the end of my presentation. So that's a quick summary. I'm happy to go back. We can have discussion about any of these 3 points, but I know ADUs is the big subject matter. So
Hey, Fred. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We do also have that table. Do you have it, or do you want me to pull it up? Yep. So we have a table that outlines what Colorado Springs, Green Mountain Falls, and Idaho Springs and Woodland Park have adopted for ADUs, and how those categories are being regulated across neighboring communities or similar communities. So let me get that pulled up.
When is it appropriate to ask something else that's not related to ADUs?
Let's So see, I think probably unless, I don't want to be here till 11 o'clock. So I don't, it's not a blank check. Yeah. But yeah, we can, we're together. We might as well discuss. But maybe we start with the ADUs and since it seems to be a really important thing and then see where we go.
This is, yeah,
That's,
not the best.
it's hard to see.
It is difficult to see. It was distributed as part of the packet as well. So maybe what we could do is go through kind of row by row and just do a brief overview if anyone has any objections to that, or do you?
Can I just ask a general question? ADUs in this situation will have all the same requirements for setbacks and side yard setbacks, back setback. We're not waiving that so you can build an ADU. Correct?
That's correct. The law indicates that we cannot be more restrictive in terms of setbacks for an ADU than what would apply to a single family residential unit.
Anything regarding lot size?
We cannot, again, that goes back to, we cannot require a larger lot size than what we would require for a single family unit. So we can't say that you have to have 5 acres in order to have an ADU, because that's more than what we allow for a single family residential unit.
But we can enforce our lot coverage regulations.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, my understanding is that all dimensional standards are upheld. We can't do things like significantly reduce density, thereby kind of limiting lot size and things like that. So this is this is a table put together by the Department of Local Affairs. On the left column is what subject jurisdictions may regulate, and on the right is what they may not regulate. I'm sure it's not exhaustive, but it is a good guideline.
Could you explain the lot coverage and how, I'm not familiar with that code requirement and how that comes into play here? Is that essentially requiring something similar as a minimum lot size in terms of how to be interpreted?
So the way that it comes into play for development is if you have a lot that's 1 acre and it's zoned general residential, you can have up to, I'm not recalling it off the top of my head, but let's say 50% can be covered with impervious surfaces. So that's your buildings, your driveways, solar panels, anything like that. And so this would, some folks have accessory structures that are kind of in that allowance. And so we would be able, my understanding is that we'd be able to maintain those restrictions because that is a dimensional standard.
And for general residential, the lot coverage is 50%. And it looks like low density is 35%. And then high density, I think, is 75 or high density is 75. And then hillside low density is a weird calculation but it's a fraction of that.
Thanks. That's helpful.
Steve.
So just for my clarification, an ADU has to meet all the same requirements as an addition on the main structure, except it's not physically attached.
It may be
May
physically
be.
attached. So they can be attached or integrated. They can also be detached. And
How would that be different than an addition?
it allows more people to live there.
Ah.
It's a separate dwelling unit, so it would have a separate kitchen and, you know, in entire housekeeping unit.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And to clarify, and this is for staff, I think that question about, and your question too, what would be required for ADUs, that's part of the work here, right? Is to make a recommendation. It can't be more stringent, but it can be less stringent, or it can be exactly the same.
Yeah, that's correct. So the bill or the law is setting a minimum standard for what we must allow for ADUs. We can be more flexible. The city can be more flexible than that, or allow more than what the law requires.
I heard a rumor that Colorado Springs is restricting ADUs in the wildland urban interface. Do we know anything about that, or have we heard that?
Yes. While I find that, I believe Commissioner Casey had a question. Oh, wait, sorry, I found it quicker. So in Colorado Springs, their most recent update as of April 8th, detached, integrated, and attached ADUs are permitted in all zone districts except where a parcel is covered by the Wildland Urban Interface Overlay, the WUI district.
I mean, that would be all of Manitou. Almost.
I don't know if the state has reviewed Colorado Springs for compliance. Or if that would be, if that particular provision is going to be upheld.
So Chelsea, this chart you're referring to, are these changes made to comply with the state law, or was this previous information just for us?
Colorado Springs did make this revision with the intent to comply. Woodland Parks actually predates it by 11 years. Green Mountain Falls, I believe, and Idaho Springs are both in the process of revising theirs. But these are all existing comparison communities that have provisions for accessory dwelling units. So I apologize, but the state has not issued really like a comprehensive list of which communities are compliant at this point.
So I guess, is this pre-law or post-law?
For Colorado Springs, it is post-law. They actually had gone through a whole land use and development code update, and then the was passed and they found that their ADU was out of compliance. Their ADU provisions were out of compliance. So they went through and did a second round undoing what they had just done. And so that update is as of April 8th, 2025, which is after the legislation of last summer.
And one other comment, I'm just confused about the agenda. What's the goal tonight? Are we going to come up with verbiage for a code change or an ordinance, or what do we want to get out of tonight?
I think what we're trying to do is understand, maybe understand from the Planning Commission and the HAB, the general direction. I think maybe the first question might be, I threw out a suggested revision to try to start with and say, you know, is that the direction that we want to go in, or is there, or does the Planning Commission and HAB want to go in a different direction, want to allow more than what the law requires, or something different. So for example, we could also revisit the legal memo that we provided last month that indicates that talks about that talks about the argument of home rule municipalities. There may not need to be home rule municipalities may not need to comply with the law to begin with, but that's, there's some legal challenges going on in the state right now regarding that. So what I tried to do is provide something that you could look at and either say, yep, that looks good, or no, that's something to discuss and something to maybe provide information and input on.
But we will be bringing back a proposed ordinance for an official recommendation to city council. So we're using this work session to help guide our draft.
Do you want to bring back your recommended language and put it up so we have something to look at?
I have a question. Did you share the HAB ordinance that we developed? Was that in the packet?
It was in the packet last month. It was in the planning commission packet.
Okay, so they have it. So in there, there's a lot of content that's been developed that indicates kind of definition, and it indicates size and height, some kind of things that we've worked on since 2018. So it's a lot of work that we've put into it. So I just had assumed that we were going to be working on that as well, but my misunderstanding.
Well, what I would suggest is to get all the questions answered on AUs, and then maybe start with HAB, let you express your thoughts or suggestions. And then you can bounce it off the commission.
Commissioner Day has her hand raised.
Hi, folks. I just want to point out that the historic built environment in Manitou has had a lot of cottages. So my property, as an example, I do have a cottage. So that is an ADU to my primary dwelling. And it is one of 3 cottages that were historically on the property, in addition to like a sleeping gazebo. So this is very common in Manitou, and to sort of respect the historic built environment in our historic district and as a land use. I hope that we can consider broader number and actually not limit the number of ADUs. There are so many other restrictions that are going to minimize to, I would say, very few properties to actually be able to build an ADU, including, as we've discussed, lot coverage, density restrictions, setback minimums, height maximums, and there's other ways that are, able to address any kind of nuisance, like a noise ordinance and those kinds of things. So I think that our existing code will severely limit those who are able to build ADUs in Manitou, and such that we should not put a limit on the number, certainly to 1. So my opinion, and also want to look at the extensive work that we've had by the Housing Advisory Board.
Okay, so anyway, back to my suggestion. I'd like any more questions, and then we can sort of go around and continue with one and get the questions done first. So I do have one question regarding short-term rentals. Yes, from what was presented, we can prohibit ADUs from being short-term rentals. The converse of that, can we say that if you have an ADU, can we restrict the possibility of the main house, the non-ADU being a short-term rental? Because it's kind of counterproductive if we say we want to create housing for citizens and then we just enable people to create an ADU that they're going to live in and they're going to rent out their big house. I think that would be really destructive. So I just want to clarify, can we make that restriction?
My understanding is that we cannot restrict owner occupancy. And we
I
cannot
didn't-
require it.
I didn't ask about owner occupancy. I asked about ADU. The short-term rental. Can we restrict short-term rentals in the main house if we build an ADU? Like, can I just build a little 500 square foot cottage on my property and then rent out the house short-term? I hope not, but that's what I want to clarify.
Our short-term rental regulations would prohibit most of that. So it is something that Fred and I have talked about a bit, that we'd really like to, as much as we can, keep the conversation between short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units separate, apart from what is required by the legislation.
I think that's going to be tough because I think that's a really big issue and it is very relevant. If we enable an ADU regulation, it would be nice. I mean, it'd be nice to know that we can still have control of our short-term rentals and there's not some hidden agenda that we don't know.
Alan, aren't we maxed out anyway? Right now, we're maxed out on short-term rental in the city.
Possibly, we're close.
I mean,
but-
there's like one spot
Yeah.
that we could, so is
Yeah.
it that, I mean, somebody builds an accessory dwelling unit, we're already
Yeah,
maxed
well,
out.
Okay, let's just, it's a question I've asked and we can table it, but I'd like an answer at some point.
Let me provide a short answer. So the bills do not restrict us to the bills speak nothing about our ability to restrict single family, the main residents from doing what we need to do with whether it allows short-term rental or not. So that would be up to us to
Sorry, according to the DOLA chart that I had up, subject jurisdictions may not require that the ADU or the primary single unit detached dwelling on the lot remain owner occupied with limited exceptions. So they do have guidance on whether or not we can require that. And I view owner occupancy as the requirement that permits or allows short-term renting. That's why I'm tying those two together. So I do apologize for.
So in this situation, what you're saying is they can both be long-term rentals. So two long-term rentals, no problems.
Right.
Just to clarify, what if someone wanted an ADU on a current property that had short-term rentals? Could that ADU unit be allowed to have short-term rentals?
I wouldn't think it would be because you're getting approval for the ADU or the short-term rental on that area, and you're not allowed to have another one for 500 feet. So you wouldn't be able to make that one.
Yeah, I think it's just something to keep in mind that we don't want to just enable the wrong opportunity. And, if the goal is more housing, let's make sure we bulletproof it.
Yeah, so if the city wanted to restrict and say no short-term rental on the property that contains an ADU, I think you could make an amendment to our short-term rental regulations for that.
Yeah. Okay. If got more questions, let's do that, but then let's go around after that.
Okay. And if that's okay.
Sure.
And this is for Brett and the team, and it builds a little bit on what Megan said and the great point you made, which is, I think, having lived through this process in a prior town where my wife and I recently moved from, I'd strongly suggest and encourage that different forecasts to size the potential outcomes. So for example, if we ask the question, how many single family unit dwellings are there that could potentially build an ADU? What is that number? How many of those potential homeowners in those have indicated directionally that they would be interested in doing that over what period of time? And when you looked at that, forecasted out some of those numbers, number of cars, number of people forecasted, it would give, I think, the Planning Commission and council sort of a ballpark wireframe in terms of the impact to the community that I think would be really, really useful. So I don't know if you have that data available, but I think even if it's back of the envelope math and directional, I think it'll help bring a lot of peace of mind to the community. Because it's one thing to have 15 ADUs built. It's an entirely different thing if your forecasts come out to be 120 ADUs over an 18-month period, and how that's financed, if it's one corporate developer, if there's different incentive programs and all of that. Does that help, Fred? And
Yeah, yes, it does. And no, we don't have that information. We haven't generated that information yet.
And I'm happy from a HAB perspective to be a sounding board if you wireframe any of that stuff out. Keep me on speed dial on that one, having a lived experience with it.
Can I just piggyback off of that, Nate? It's Amy from the HAB. Just to remind everybody with Prop 123 funding availabilities, you have to almost forecast that out because what the HABs advised council to do was to apply for Prop 123 funding. And when you do that, you have a commitment of how many, I think it was 42 houses at that time either would be rehabbed or lots would provide ADUs. So when you can forecast that out, it definitely can show that we're doing our due diligence as far as matching funding opportunities.
Leah.
Yeah, and Nate, building on your question a little bit, and maybe a little background, when the HAB created the draft ADU ordinance back in 2018, there was a minimum lot size, and we did do some forecasting. And I think the big data gap that we're not going to be able to have is how many people are interested, right? But I'm particularly interested in the lot coverage and how that's really going to impact the ability to permit by right an ADU on our existing lots. And so I think just like really supporting that question, if there's any way that we can help in coming up with that estimate. And also just wondering if any of by the way, what you put together with the comparison of those 4 cities is just fabulous. Thank you. And did you look at whether any of them have a lot coverage minimum or maximum? And yeah.
Every zoning code I've worked with has always had a lot coverage maximum. Some of them have lot coverage minimums, some of them have setback minimums. So there's a lot of that. I don't think it's uncommon to have buildable area, but I think what I've run into when folks come in asking sort of exploratory questions, similar to these, and this is a great forum for it, but I struggle with the framework of regulation to be as to have the ingenuity that developers have. And so when you look at the possibility of having integrated ADUs as well as detached, that wouldn't in particular, if you were to build a second floor unit or, things like that, that can create the second unit, but not, increase your lot coverage. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but not necessarily something that we may be able to quantify is just how are people going to want to put these together. It could be, hey, we want to finish out our basement. It could be any number of things that people use to generate a new dwelling unit. Thanks.
I have one observation, months ago when the state legislature was discussing this various bills, there was a lot of talk about attainable housing and affordable housing. Those words seem to be missing now. So I wondered, Allison from Housing Authority Board, what are your thoughts on a big market value is going to be $2,000
For
for a one bedroom?
Yeah, no. And we see ADUs as an opportunity to increase affordability. It can be also for people to be able to age in place. If they're in a larger home, they could build an accessory dwelling unit that could be like their space if a partner has died or they just need a smaller space, and then have some increased kind of income even coming out of their larger unit as like one idea, or conversion of a garage into an accessory dwelling unit, again, allowing that person the ability to have some increased income. We've tossed around the idea of seeing if there's any opportunities within either these House bills or Prop 123 around incentivizing homeowners to consider an ADU on their property if they're willing to, again, this would have to be approved through planning and city council, but if that person's willing to serve a person in the affordable, like area medium income, which is below 50% area medium income, to live in that unit on an affordable scope for a certain amount of time, and then the city or like one of these House bills. Again, I haven't dug into exactly how these House bills can offer funding, but that's one way to increase affordability with I think it's 43 units that the city of Manitou is committed to build for affordable. So that was one thing in HAB that we've talked about, using the ADUs as an opportunity if, like, say, because I live in an area of town, the Crystal Valley, which has often double lots, I could have a ADU and I rent it on an affordable level. And it could even be to a family member. Like if I had a family member with a disability or something and they have a voucher, they could have that unit and it would count as the affordable, capturing that. So those were some options. And I don't know if Aaliyah or Crystal has other ideas on the affordable ability of building an ADU.
One of the things that we could look into, and this is just up the top of my head, so I don't, is deed restrictions on some of those ADUs to ensure like the long-term affordability, if that is something that and it could be optional, but having some sort of incentive about that for the deed restriction so that it continues to be a long-term affordable rental, if that is something that you're interested in.
And I might add to Allison and to this, and Gloria, it's nice to see you. Used to seeing you in the Citizens Academy as a classmate. But just to give you an example, so there was a ribbon cutting in Colorado Springs for a 53 unit building, and they sourced that funding from multiple funding sources, and they supported it with low income tax credits with the corporate developers and the investors. That project was $22 million. And I say that in no way to advocate for that model, but a corporate developer can build a lot of ADUs with $20 million. The question is kind of decoupling how to fund it, how to execute it, and then to size the scale and impact and what that may look like for a community of 5,000 people. Because there's implications there. There's great implications and there's potentially very concerning implications with the way that's done. So those kinds of learnings, I think, are just important to support and inform the planning commission and so forth. And I think, Aaliyah, and the great work you did from 2018 when I was going through it, Allison was kind enough to send it on. And this speaks a little bit to what Megan was getting at. I think at that time when you had done some of that survey, there were like 200 sort of ADUs like Megan's describing in Manitou today, sort of the cottages that exist. So that just gives you kind of a directional guidepost. 200 ADUs in our community today, what that looks like in 2026, 2027, that's TBD. That's part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think, one thing to keep in mind that back when I was thinking about this in 2018, the notion of the attached ADU kept popping up in my head. And that's, the entire LDR zone. They're big lots and they're big houses. And the trend is people don't have as many kids. They don't have as much need. They want to stay in their house. It seems like there is possibility for a lot of those larger, 3,000, 3,500 square foot houses to have at least a studio or a 1-bedroom attached ADU. And so that's like, it doesn't impact things like lot coverage, but so it's a factor if this really happened. And I guess the thing we saw, like once the short-term rental phenomena exploded, like about 15 years ago or 20 years ago, there were a lot of developers that saw that as an opportunity. And I would see the same thing happening, or the potential for people when, like, if I sell my house, it would be beautiful. It'd be easy to, without doing anything other than putting in the appropriate firewalls, it could easily be have a attached ADU. And I think pretty much most houses in the LDR could do that. And that's several hundred, certainly. Mike might know, realtors know that kind of stuff. Like, there are lots of houses. So it's just another factor. But we seem to be just sort of going around and around. So I suggest maybe, have a few minutes, just if you want to go around and poll and get any other ideas, and then we can do the same with the commission, and then maybe come up with it seems like there are a few questions, like, do we want to limit the number of ADUs? Do we want to restrict short-term rentals, and any other notions? And then let's sort of poll, and that'll give the staff some kind of guidance to know which way to go with sort of doing this ordinance. And so that's my suggestion. So Allison, why don't you take over for a minute?
Rebecca, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I would not care for restricting the number of ADUs, but I do want to restrict the short-term rentals. I think we have enough. And that's just my input.
A point of clarity, when we're talking about restricting the number of ADUs, do you mean per lot? Or per existing detached dwelling unit? Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. I mean, I will just read some things that are already in the ordinance. I mean, we did have that accessory dwelling units are not eligible as short-term rentals. We had some language in here about accessory dwellings are permitted in the following zones on lots of 4,500 square feet or more. And we said due to local hazard realities, but that planning needed to address this through their expertise. We spoke about, I think at the time, about parking, we said one off-street parking. I know that's not necessarily required. And then we had said that ADUs may not be bigger than the primary building lot coverage, including the ADU, may be no more than 80%. And the maximum height allowed for an ADU is 25 feet. So again, we had done a lot of research on that. So those are just some of the points that I will note.
I'm just really in support of ensuring that there's no short-term rentals. And I love the idea of looking at incentives to get, you know, homeowners to go, okay, we want to do this for affordable housing and for hopefully, like, I get worried about families and children in our community because it feels like we're losing a lot of that, you know, when you look at our school data. So trying to increase that.
Amy?
Hi, guys. So we have done a lot of trying to educate the community about what affordable housing is. And the HUD defines that as 30% of your median income. And so we've seen through Plan Manitou and through a lot of the community surveys that this affordable housing notion keeps coming up. And we keep trying to address that in a Manitou style way. So an age in place, any kind of accessory dwelling unit, any kind of rehab to an older historic home, anything like that that we can do that's very Manitou, right? But we know that we have some Nancy Fortune is our wonderful liaison, and she's always reminding us that there's a limit to things that we can do because of you know, just the nature of our wonderful mountainous region. But I think that Allison and Aaliyah, I just want to thank them. I'm a new HAB member. I've been on the HAB for about 2 years now. Something like that. And the work that they did in 2018 for these ADUs was ahead of the curve, and it was very labor intensive, and I know they did it from the heart. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. Reading all of this and educating myself on the board made me feel very bad that Allison and Aaliyah have been doing this for so long and I need to step it up. But with that being said, the thing that stuck out to me the most with their work was that right now to qualify for an ADU, your lot has to be 8,700 square feet, and that's about the size of 2 tennis courts. And so the recommendation from the HAB was to make that allowable to 4,500 square feet. I think that's the biggest point for me on that ordinance rewrite, because that is closer to a basketball court. And we know that these cottages are very Manitou, and that, like, sure, can people remodel their garage, remodel their basement, have an attached dwelling? Sure. But the likelihood is people don't want to share walls. That's the truth. Okay. Especially if they have a house, a generational house that they've had for years. A cottage is just a little bit more you know, savory. So that's the biggest thing for me. It's not that we can't incentivize attached accessory dwelling units. We could even make tiers for what you have to offer. But that kind of lot size is what stuck out to me. I also love our chair's incentive concepts to rent ADUs at a below 50% AMI, to commit to that rate for a certain amount of years, and to rent to a long-term tenant, obviously not short-term. And in return, they could receive, Chelsea, don't freak out, permit fee reduction, setback flexibility, faster approval, or small tax utility incentives.
Beautiful. Thank you, Amy.
Amy, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So I'm in my head, I'm thinking basketball court. So are you saying, so if there's another cottage on that basketball court size lot, you're saying allowing somebody to put a second unit on that basketball court size lot? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying right now, if I own a property that's 8,700 square feet on the plat, I
Right.
cannot build a cottage style ADU.
Okay.
I
And
mean,
are,
I can. I'm sorry, Allison, help me out here. I'm getting numbers.
I'm just trying to envision that working in, so you're thinking zero setbacks from the neighbors to be
No,
able to make that work?
it's
in
just
a
saying like basically right
small-
now, a single family unit, you have to have 8,700 plat size. And we're saying like you could make, if that's true now, you could say 4,500 goes to the original property, 4,500 basically goes to the ADU. So you're just basically allowing for, I mean, I'm not the expert. I don't want to say anything wrong. Planning department is
I
watching.
was just trying to
But
understand what you're
that's how
saying.
I interpreted it. I looked at it as like, oh, I own a tennis court. I can sell off this side of the tennis court, redevelop this side of the tennis court, where before I could just use that for gardening.
I'll just add one thing that I think this state legislation gets rid of that notion of you have to have 8,700 square feet. Basically, the law says if you have a single family lot, you are entitled to have an ADU on it in addition, detached or attached. It's not specified. The only thing we will control, I assume, will be lot coverage. So if you have a 4340 lot, which is the minimum lot size for general residential, if you can squeeze on a cottage and still meet the lot coverage regulation, you can have a second dwelling unit on that lot.
Are you saying you'd be waiving setbacks?
Well, no, within the constraints of the lot, but yeah, like there,
So from our,
if someone had a detached garage, for example, they could conceivably make that, and that's been brought up in the past. So anyway, you're back in control, Allison, with your.
That's okay. Yeah, I think she was probably referencing on page 1, there's like a section 1 about the lot size. And it just said the general residential zone for a second dwelling unit is changed from 8,700 square feet to 4,500 square feet. And it's some kind of ordinance. So I don't know if Shelty, you know what that means?
Yeah, let me shed some light on that. So in the general residential zone district, our minimum lot size is 4,400 square feet. And we allow 10 dwelling units per acre in the general residential zone district. So that means that you can have one dwelling unit per this size lot, which happens to be 1/10 of an acre. So in order to have 2 dwelling units, you need 2/10 of an acre, which is 8,700.
Got it.
That's our current, or.
That is our current.
Is, which the state legislature said is no longer relevant.
Correct. We wouldn't, my understanding is that we wouldn't be changing our minimum lot size. We would simply be changing the uses for those lots, which is if you can have one house, now you can have 2 houses.
Got it. All right. Thank you, Amy. Aaliyah, do you have anything?
I think that's a really important point of clarification. Yeah, that we will get rid of the minimum lot size for a second unit. Not the first unit. I understand.
Right.
That
Yeah.
won't change.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
And Amy, 2 years, I think you're a seasoned HAB member now. And Alan was with us in 2018, thinking through all of this. Yeah. I think that a couple thoughts. I mean, I think that probably the most straightforward way to pass something that will get broader support from our community is similar to what Fred proposed, in that we just follow the existing code requirements, and those apply to the ADU, to the second unit, similarly as they do to the primary unit. I think that it is in our best interest to consider stretching that a little bit further, and particularly as it relates to lot coverage and setbacks. I am saying that without being very familiar with our current setback code requirements and how strict they are, other than listening to the applicant earlier today in the LDR. We talked about this a lot when we developed this ordinance back a number of years back, and kind of building on what a point Megan made earlier. Like, I don't think that we are going to see a lot of ADU build out unless we really develop some serious incentives to do that. I think that this is a very important thing to do, and it's a part of the solution, but we're not going to pass it and they will come. I just don't think we're going to see a ton of building. And I mean, maybe, if we build in the incentives, if we can find the right developers, but and Nate, I don't know what your experience, I think you said your experience is maybe similar in the other city. It's been very different across the country as I've seen it build out, and it really does depend a lot on the incentives. And so I think just making sure we aren't overly restrictive so that we're overly limiting the number of lots that could benefit from an ADU is something I'm interested in looking more at, some of those maybe key existing code requirements that maybe if we did add a little more flexibility could perhaps go a long way.
Thanks, Aaliyah. Glenn, do you have anything?
A lot of it's been said. I just think that philosophically it will be an advantage for Manitou to want to encourage the possibility of younger folks being able to afford something to live in. I have an adult child that she couldn't afford to buy a place or rent a place in Manitou. She moved to Colorado Springs. So I think having that would be helpful. And I see that ADU might be a possibility of that solution. The other thing is the aging in place possibilities. I think that's really an issue for a lot of folks, could be in Manitou. I don't think we'll have a lot of ADUs, as was said.
Thanks, Glenn. Nate?
No, I hope I shared my view and recommendation, Fred and team, future state, what the future state looks like 3 years from now. So if you look at the community profile map with the inventory of structures, you run through 4 or 5 scenarios, some with corporate developers who aren't interested, others where corporate developers can't wait to build 50 ADUs in Manitou, and what that looks like. And then I think from a planning commission and everything, and HAB, I know we'll be very passionate about educating around affordable housing. The project that I mentioned to you in Colorado Springs was met with enormous headwinds, litigation. People didn't want that structure there. And so I think from socializing what the future community may look like, whether it's 10 new ADUs or 150 ADUs, I think it'll be really, really important.
Thank you.
Okay, do you have anything more, Allison, or are you? Okay, okay, so let's move on to the commission. We'll start with Mike over there.
Just the thought of a corporation coming in to build ADUs in Manitou just sent a shiver up my spine. I mean, seriously, that's something, our job is to think out of the box, and how to prevent that, I don't know, but that was, I won't sleep. And I wasn't here last month, and I read the minutes, and apparently we talked about, for lack of a better term, quality. How do you prevent somebody from putting a school bus in their yard and calling that an ADU or a shipping container? That's just food for thought. And then lastly, what about the infrastructure? If you built a second home on your property, does it have to be individually metered? Gas meters, like water meters? Can you tie into the existing sewer line, or do you have to provide a new sewer line? I think it's an interesting thought as well. That's all I got.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, I would agree with Mike said about the utility requirements, given this just the nature of how old a lot of our utilities here are currently, so that'd be important. I think it's important to make sure the parking requirements are definitely adhered to, just given the challenges that we have parking here in town for the most part. I think you've already talked about the short-term rentals. That seems like an easy one to make sure that doesn't expand from where it is right now. And then I think the incentives that's a different subject to incentivize that from this ordinance. And finally, I would say I would not be in favor of expanding it to more than one unit per ADU until one property, until you see how the current program goes, and see how that goes before expanding that beyond one.
Right.
Well, it seems to me it's obviously going to be a learning experience, and because of that, I'm definitely in favor of more flexibility in the code.
So I come from San Diego, Orange County, where ADUs were allowed and setbacks were very limited, and it destroyed communities, totally destroyed communities. You go down a block and you can't see light between houses. You've got apartments in front, some people build apartments in the back. And it was just to maximize the profit, right? People come in, buy up, see that the land's got available, they can build something there. They take it, they build as big as they possibly can, and their neighbor's garden can no longer function because the light's gone. So I feel like, and from what I've heard from neighbors, they have concerns about ADUs coming in and being built too close to property lines. You know, what if my flower garden gets shaded? What if my garden gets shaded? So I'm not necessarily in favor of reducing what our existing setbacks are and trying to make this work for the community, but make it work for the individual neighbors where something's getting built, 3 feet from them. You really don't want to see that happen. I am in favor of trying to figure out how to get the funding to make some of these low income housing projects work.
Lori.
The benefit of being sitting on this end of the table is pretty much, I could say ditto, 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 ditto. I think ADUs will be primarily self-limiting just because of our topography and ability to build those. I'm really most interested about housing occupancy limits, because I've lived in a 500 square foot condo before, and you would not want, if you have 6 people in there, it's a hostel. It's bunk beds and so forth. So that's of interest to me to talk about a little bit further, as is the parking. I love the notion of incentives to make these attainable and or affordable.
I think our current codes really protect us against what most of your concerns are. If, as you say, we don't change setbacks, we don't change lot coverage, it's going to be a pretty limited thing in this community. I do like the idea of giving property owners a little more control over their property and the ability to make money on it. So I think if we don't change a lot of our codes, I don't see a problem with this.
Just okay, Megan.
Sorry, turning on the mute button. I did have a few words earlier, but I would add that I think we should look at some flexibility, because our current setbacks and density and lot coverage, it really forces a suburban style of of building, and so in the historic areas of the town, we're very much closer together. Also, things like minimum lot frontage and that is really restrictive. So it would restrict many of us who live in, properties that were built before 1950 from having that kind of flexibility. So I would be in favor of also adding a little bit of flexibility to allow us a little bit more in terms of small housing and affordable and attainable housing.
Okay, I guess I'm the last one here. I guess my thoughts are I would like to limit it for the time being to no more than one ADU per property, and certainly bulletproof the prevention of short-term rentals. But as far as lot coverage, I think that's with the fire danger and topology. I think we'd be crazy to do many changes to the lot coverage. I think it's a fire issue as much as anything. And so that's, maybe there's some tweaking, maybe 50% is too restrictive in some areas, but it just seems to me it's a pretty important factor to keep in touch. I think that's probably why part of the reason that Colorado Springs sort of stuck their neck out and basically said no ADUs in the WUI. So I think anyway, we just have to respect the reality of climate change and fires and so on. So with that, I think I don't know if we want to, we've had a lot of discussion, and maybe it's time, if the staff wants to sort of poll on any particular issues, like, just sort of get a sense of where to go or how you'd like to move forward here. Because we could philosophize for another 3 hours if we're not careful. And I think I'd rather not do that.
So maybe I can say, okay, this is what I've heard and see. So I think what I'm hearing and maybe what I'll do kind of as a pathway forward is identify a couple scenarios, do some scenario building, identify some scenarios, if this, then what, if this, then that and identify, if we allow ADUs with current dimensional requirements, we could speculate that we could have up to X number or something like that. And if we change the requirements a little bit, we could expect to have X number of ADUs. I'm also hearing that there's a concern about affordability and the question about that's fine if we allow more units like this in the city, but will they be affordable? And so make sure that we understand opportunities for affordability. There's a lot of funding opportunities from the state, and maybe identify what's available and what could be available to us, including Prop 123 funds. So that's what I'm hearing right now. That I could possibly provide some scenarios to help all of us visualize what that would look like if we, add this regulation. This is what it would look like if we do this regulation and allow two ADUs. This is what it could look like. Would that be on the right track?
I think it'd be really interesting to see that. And I think if you said we're going to just look at the lots in the city today and current building standards, how many ADUs does that mean? And if we limited it, took away five feet of the setback, it means you increase 20%, or, that I think that would be really helpful.
Okay.
I'd also be interested in staff's comments on the draft ordinance that the HAB has already developed. You know, it was a few years ago now. What do you think of it, and in light of these changes?
So from my perspective, I thought the draft ordinance was similar, was not out of the ordinary to what we're trying to do. And there are some things in the ordinance that that the law actually does not allow. And so we can't go in some directions, but we could go in other directions. I'm not going to go into specifics right now, but I could certainly do that if the planning commission wishes, and I could take a look at that in more detail for the next meeting.
But I'm not really trying to create more work for you.
Thank you. But I really didn't see, just on the face of it, I didn't think that there was anything in the draft ordinance from 2018 that was exceptionally different to what we're trying to do now. I think we're on the same track.
So if we were to take the draft ordinance and overlay these changes, we'd have a real good start. Maybe more than a start.
Yeah, and that might be one scenario, or an additional scenario. What if we just adopted the HAB ordinance, and see, you know, what scenario would that give us?
And that's something, I mean, we can take that on, even just sort of in our next board meeting, just placing some of the things that were talked about tonight, just so you all, because you're all, you know, you have a whole scope of work where this is sort of our focus. And as like Amy said, we have new members, so they can, you know, and then of course it would come to planning and come back to you all, just as a thought to be helpful.
So, Fred, we had this June 30th deadline. What's going on with that?
So I haven't received a lot more information than what I had last month, but I did submit a request to DOLA for an extension. They allow that, they allow up to a 6-month extension. I made that request. That request is still pending. I'm still waiting. That's where we're sitting right now.
Okay, so it seems like, to me, just to go ahead with what you're working on and factor in all of what's been presented tonight. I think if you've got a working draft you're working with, I think that's the place to start.
Yeah, if everybody's happy with what I guess what I've relayed back, we'll work on that for the next meeting. Go for it.
I would ask for clarification on just a couple topics. I think I heard kind of general consensus that we want to maintain, and of course, this isn't entirely within the scope of these boards, but maintain the historic district regulations as they would relate to new construction in the historic district. Is that? I'm getting head nods. Okay.
And would that also apply to the cabin district?
Yeah, so 70% of the community is in the historic district. And so when we look at things like corporate construction of ADUs, I do think that some of our very unique across the 12 different historic sub-districts, I think a lot of those regulations are going to dissuade some of that mass production essentially. So I wanted to get clarity that we're going to keep that applicable, more or less keep setbacks similar to what they are, is kind of what I've been hearing. And then generally come into compliance with other guidelines of the state's requirements. Is that generally the direction that we're moving in?
That sounds like what I've heard.
But Chelsea, just using the school bus as an example, how would you prevent that? For somebody parking a school bus in their yard and calling it an ADU, how do you prevent that?
The building code prevents that. So, and you also mentioned shipping containers. So we do preclude shipping containers as accessory structures at all. Typically structures, and especially residential structures, have to have a permanent foundation and be fixed to permanent utilities. I do think the infrastructure question that you posed is particularly interesting, as we're dealing with a couple of cases that it may become applicable to. But typically, a structure has to be a structure and not an immobile vehicle.
Okay.
So,
And then no matter how we paint this, homeowner can request a variance down the road, correct?
yes. And typically my philosophy when we're looking at ordinances is you don't know what holes and what leaks you need to plug until you've adopted it. So there are always refinements that can be made. Right now, I think the general idea is to come into compliance. So
I just wanted to clarify because I think I heard two things. You request just one path, and if it, I also don't want to create a lot more work for you, but if it is appropriate and acceptable for you to provide some information on two scenarios and how you laid it out, I love that. I think that would be really useful for us all to see.
I will work towards that. We'll work towards that.
I don't know, Amy, did you still have your hand up or?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask for staff and the planning commission, would it be helpful for us to flesh out some of those incentives? It sounds to me like we're going to adopt the code and do it as the state, as close to what we have as and what the state requires, but just to kind of be preemptive in helping staff and as we're sitting here in this joint commission, is that something that you guys would be interested in providing?
Yes, we could take all the help that that you would like to provide. And if you or if members on the HAB would want to do that for us, that would be very helpful. I keep on thinking about carrots and sticks. You know, there's incentives for affordable housing, and then there's sticks for affordable housing. It's one thing to have a carrot and say, here, we can provide money for you if you're going to make this ADU affordable. It's another thing if we write it in the code, well, if you're going to build an ADU, it must be affordable. That might be more disincentive than anything. So incentives, especially financial, would be helpful. So thank you, Amy.
Yeah, and to add to that, I don't know again if it would be a planning conversation, and I want to make sure I heard it right. Felt like I heard Megan, and I don't see her on there anymore. Oh, is she there? She's just hiding. Okay. I thought she said something about not like opening up the variances within historic. Did I hear that right, or am I making that up? And then I was just curious, then my second thing would be, well, maybe part of the write-up could be if someone is going to do the affordable housing, then the incentive could be maybe they could get a variance.
Well, I was just, oh, sorry, go ahead, Megan. I'm sorry.
I think I was just trying to argue for a little bit more flexibility given the unique nature of those of us who live in older properties with unique sort of smaller lots.
I was just gonna say from the staff of the things I listed, I'm sure there was some immediately no, that would never work. Like, and we don't know that, you know? And so it would be helpful for us to say, like, well, these kinds of incentives, it might take some mental gymnastics, but they could fly. These kinds over here, and very much so like what we've learned through our energy efficiency program, you know, the incentive, some of the incentives with the water work, sometimes they don't. What is it definitely like that we can never do that, Amy? Um, Hard no.
Okay.
I don't think that we have, I don't think there are any hard no's when it comes to zoning regulation, except for things that of course are illegal. But when you're looking at incentivizing, it relies on more than just the zoning code. And, so I think we don't have a full analysis that we can give you on like yes, no's of what you've presented right now. I think we'd need to do a lot more research on some of those.
Okay, we'll just come up with a lot, but just know that we know you guys will rein us in, okay?
Okay, just a historic thing. We do in our code now have one section where we talk about incentives for deed restricted housing. That is in the code, but there may be possibilities for other places. But that's, again, you guys are going to provide some input to staff, and then we go from there. And just the reverse of that, though, I was thinking like my understanding of what the state was trying to do, they would not be happy with sticks in sense of like if we say you can't do an ADU unless you do this affordability. I don't get the sense they were going there. The philosophy is just create a whole bunch more of dwellings and prices will go down. I don't agree with it, but that's, I talked to Mark Snyder a lot, and he kept saying that, and till I stopped listening. But anyway, I think we have a good plan going forward. And are we at a good stopping point here?
For ADUs, I believe, but do we need direction on the other two?
I think we're at a good stopping point for ADUs. Any other comments? I know you had mentioned about the other two things. I provided a possible draft of a change that would be in conformance that would be in compliance with those other two state laws. If there are any thoughts about that, I'm happy to hear them, but I think my plan is to just move forward with some draft language that would be in compliance with state law. Unless I hear something different from that group.
Yeah, I think you had a pretty good plan. I don't know any other, Frank?
I just had a clarification on 1304. What's defined as a multi-family? How many units? Is that over 4?
Code currently defines it as 3 or more.
Is what?
3 units or more.
3 or more is a multifamily. And would that impact any, if a property is already zoned for multifamily, then it will allow, if it's not zoned for multifamily, would it have any change to that or any potential to change that zoning?
Could you repeat the question?
And I don't know all the zoning, what zones are what, but if a property is not currently zoned for multifamily, could this change in the law, whatever, could that force a change without an approval process going through?
And you're talking about House Bill 1304, the minimum parking requirements? I'm looking through it right now. I remember right.
And I guess it goes to the point the same way with the ADUs. How many properties are you would really be impacted If it's just based on existing zoning, it doesn't change anything.
So 1304 just speaks to, it tells us that, no off-street parking shall be required for new multifamily development in a certain area. If that area doesn't, if that area does not allow for multifamily development, then we don't have to worry about it. But in our case, it does. That area around the transit lines do allow for some multifamily development. So we have to be mindful of that, no off-street parking requirement. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I guess the question would be how much property are we actually talking that would be impacted by that that requirement?
So I think the disconnect here is that the legislation is not specific to multifamily zoned properties. It is for properties whose zoning allow multifamily. And so in Manitou Springs, we actually don't have, we technically have a high density residential zone district. However, I don't believe any properties are actually zoned that. And so development on those along the, like, are you just wondering how many properties are within that that purple buffer area? We can run that analysis for you, absolutely. How many of those are residential versus commercial? And I think we could figure that out.
You're saying that anything that's 3 or more is considered multifamily, right? I think that's what you said, or more than 2.
Right. And I think I was not quite understanding where that question was going when I answered that way. I apologize. So are you?
I mean, if you look at our code, anything that's either mixed use, commercial, or general residential, you can have, like general residential, you can have multi-household small up to 8 units. So wouldn't that then sort of gets pulled into this no parking, minimum parking requirements?
If it's a multifamily development, right? Like it doesn't apply to off-street parking for any use in that area. It's specific to new developments for multifamily residential.
So if I had a 16,000 square foot general residential property, I could scrape it off and put up a 8-plex and then not have any minimum parking requirements.
No, because you still have density requirements. So if we look at the ADU law, and it's kind of like a buy one, get one free now, right? You can have one dwelling unit plus an ADU in a lot that size, if it's a legal non-conforming lot.
Okay, so
you could not have 3 dwelling units, and therefore you would not be required to reduce or to not.
okay, so if
provide
I
off-street
had
parking.
a general residential lot that was sufficient to support 4 units, then it would, so if it was like,
then we would not be able to require off-street parking in accordance
so
with this.
that could be a lot of Manitou that, I guess it depends, anywhere there's a big general residential lot. I'm just trying to sort of, figure out like
Anywhere that there's a big residential lot within the purple buffer area.
Yeah. Okay.
So there, I would say, are relatively few that are not currently developed.
Okay.
That's my technical answer for you.
Okay. Anything else? Do we have enough, or are there other? Fred?
I think we're good.
Okay. Okay, well, let's talk about completely changing all the dimensional requirements. No, let's adjourn the meeting. This has been good, and it's been really helpful having both boards. Okay, we're adjourned.